You talk about these stories that regulators never ask about. Can you share one incident that captures why these regulators are maybe needed in the first place?
Well, the one I can share, but I will not disclose any names, but that's a true story. One day, the regulator contacted all the banks in that country and said, well, we are going to conduct a pen test. We want you to lower your firewall so that we can do a pen test. And all the CISO says, no, we're not going to do that. And the regulator, why? Why? I mean, we are the regulator. No. So this is what we are fronting from time to time. And again, not every regulator is like that. Again, FINMA, MAS, these people are fantastic. They know what they're talking about. But some regulators, it's pretty tense.
Is it having a firewall in place the purpose of a pen test? I'm confused. It's their job to find a way in, not the customer's job to lower their defenses. That's very confusing.
We had to push back and say, no, it's going to be no. It's no way.
Maybe that was a test. Maybe that was a part of the test, seeing if they would lower their firewall or not. It's unbelievable. It's Ben, Director of Content here at Expel, back with another episode of Very Important Questions, talking about NIS2 and DORA, with an expert on the topic, Pierre Noel, Field CISO here at Expel Security. Pierre, how are you doing today?
Ben, I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing well, ready to learn more about NIS2 and DORA, a couple of regulations in the EU that I know you have a lot of perspectives on that you've shared at various events, over the course of time here. And I want to dig in today on those. However, in very important questions fashion, I'm also going to throw some zingers at you. So I hope you're ready for those. They're going to be great. So what we're going to do, question number one, to set the tone here, Pierre. I'm going to throw a zinger at you here to set the tone. This is it's kind of a personal question here. Would you rather always be slightly underdressed or aggressively overdressed for any given occasion? Underdressed or overdressed, Pierre?
Well, I'm afraid there's no perfect answer. It depends on the culture. In Asia, overdressed, no doubt whatsoever. In USA, underdressed. Again, it depends, East Coast, West Coast. But it really depends on the culture. I would always err on the overdressed side, just to make sure, especially if I have to convince someone.
That's an excellent answer. I wasn't expecting pulling in global perspectives here, but I appreciate that. And I'm with you. I think I would rather be, it's one of those rather be safe than sorry kind of situations, So that's, that's great. So speaking of, global perspectives, you've worked with regulators across Asia, Europe, Switzerland. From your vantage point, what's really driving DORA and NIS2 right now?
Well, a few things. DORA looks after the finance industry and NIS2 looks after critical industries or critical infrastructure. First, yes, there is a geopolitical dynamic. The truth is, DORA started before we had this war in Ukraine and all these kind of things. But there was a recognition that from a geopolitical point of view, Europe is not ready to sustain significant cybersecurity attacks, especially at the critical infrastructure level. So there was this recognition that it was time to set up some standard to ensure that not only the critical infrastructure, but also these companies servicing the critical infrastructure would have a proper baseline. And so that is what motivated DORA. NIS2 is very much for the finance industry. Well, when you look at finance, you could say, yes, I've got the banks. And of course, a Bank of America and Citibank, they are doing proper cybersecurity. They're investing billions of dollars in their cyber. But let's not forget that when we speak about finance, we also have the small insurance brokers. Yeah. They are handling some of your personal information. You have the advisors. You also have the small banks. When I was in Switzerland, one of my roles for the Swiss government was to create a community, behind-the-scene community, where the CISOs of all the finance industry across Switzerland would go and speak. And so we had the very big banks, the UBS and Credit Suisse. We had the very big insurance companies, Zurich and things like that. But we also had the very tiny banks. We concluded very easily that if there was a problem in one of these tiny banks, because they don't really pay too much attention on cyber, that would have a domino effect, especially the regulator would have to intervene. And that would be detrimental also for the very big banks that have everything in properly in place. So DORA is the answer to make sure that all the finance industry have got a proper baseline. It does not really address the big banks, the big insurance companies, because they already have most of it in place, but it was certainly meant to address the smaller organizations, and these organizations like the advisors and so on, who have not paid attention to cybersecurity in the past.
Yeah, it's a recognition that everything is interconnected in a way, and so the smaller organizations need to be as prepared as the bigger organizations, because at the end of the day, they're all handling the same sorts of sensitive data in that situation.
It's fascinating that I'm in a board of several organizations, including some very prominent ones, and I have in mind a bank again, a very prominent international banks. And when there is a discussion on the cybersecurity, when we look at the heat map of risk, the top risk, the highest probability, biggest impact is third parties. The fact that we rely on third parties, and we might have our security right, but we have to give some trust to these vendors. And that trust evolves, by the way. You might have a very tiny a relationship with vendor number A today, and 3 years from now, they do way more than what they used to do. And if you don't keep track, then suddenly you find yourself into a significant risk. And so, third-party association of companies and so on is definitely where we have a significant problem. So reason for DORA and NIS2.
We could do a whole other very important questions on supply chain security and all of the dependencies that all of these critical organizations have with other vendors, and how those vendors have dependencies on other vendors. That's a big issue. You've said, obviously we're talking here about compliance today. You've said that compliance does not equal security. You've made that statement in the past. When you look at DORA and NIS2, where do organizations most kind of misunderstand that difference?
This is a fantastic question. The risk is always that compliance overtakes security, and people will perceive these cybersecurity exercise as a tick in the box to address compliance. Now, case in point, and I have to segment here. NIS2 is meant for critical infrastructure in Europe. NIS2 has to be translated into local laws. So every country in Europe has got to implement NIS2. It has not yet taken place in every country in Europe. So the jury is still out as to what's going to happen with NIS2. DORA, on the other hand, has been established and is a full-fledged standard, and everybody has got to comply with DORA. So we have a better perspective with DORA. The news are not very good, in a sense that I see increasingly, and not only me, but I spoke to some of my CISO friends last week. We see that increasingly DORA is becoming an excuse for tick in the box type of exercise. That is, these banks that used to do proper cybersecurity, that used to invest, now the board says, well, actually, as long as we meet the DORA requirement, we should be okay, shouldn't we? And so it somewhat lowers the bar. And these organizations that had fantastic cybersecurity are somewhat lowering their standard, because they just need to address DORA, and that's good enough. And again, like, financial regulation is a very strange world. You are as good as your regulator is. And so in some countries, your financial regulator is really on top of the game, really knows what they are talking about. I can name FINMA, for example, in Switzerland. They're on top of their game. MAS in Singapore, they're on top of their game. I will not name the ones that are not on top of their games. You have many where it's really a tick in the box. The people, when the regulator sends some people for an audit at the bank or at the insurance companies, you will be faced with very young people who just graduated. They don't quite understand what they're talking about. They just follow the playbook, and they ask you questions. And as long as you respond, as long as you answer according to the playbook, you're good. They don't have the idea of looking a little bit under the carpet if anything is hidden. And we see this. Unfortunately, DORA is somewhat leading the finance organization to lower the bar when it comes to proper cybersecurity. I'm very sad about that, but this is what seems to happen. And I'm not the one saying this. It's my friends in this industry who are currently telling me that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I hate that the bar is almost being lowered for the sake of compliance, which is sad. I think that mentality of just sort of checking the box and moving on is sort of the byproduct of something like this, I would imagine. You talk about these stories that regulators never ask about. Can you share one incident that captures why these regulators are maybe needed in the first place?
Well, the one I can share, but I will not disclose any names, but that's a true story. As you know, because of my background and so on, I've got a lot of CISO friends all over the world. I mean, we're very close community and we share information. I remember very vivid, a very dear friend of mine is the CISO of a very big international bank. And as such, he has to front the regulators in all the countries where they operate. And so the regulator of a country, I'm not going to say which one, wanted to do an audit. Two funny things. It happened from the same regulator. The first one, after the audit, my friend called me and he said, "You will never believe that." They asked me some silly questions about encryption. They wanted to know the small details about encryption. They completely forgot to ask me if I knew exactly how many machines were running in my department, because I've got no clue whatsoever. I don't have a CMD being placed. And in fact, that very bank got caught a little bit later because we found out 30 servers in the DMZ and nobody knew what these servers were doing. Nobody had a clue. So, and this is true story. And the other funny story I had is, again, I will not name the regulator. One day the regulator contacted all the banks in that country and said, "Well, we are going to conduct a pen test. We want you to lower your firewall so that we can do a pen test." And all the CISO says, "No, we're not going to do that." And the regulator, why? I mean, we are the regulator. No. So this is what we are fronting from time to time. And again, not every regulator is like that. Again, FINMA, MAS, these people are fantastic. They know what they're talking about. But some regulators, it's pretty tense.
Is it having a firewall in place the purpose of a pen test? I'm confused. It's their job to find a way in, not the customer's job to lower their defenses. That's very confusing.
We had to push back and say, no, it's going to be no. It's no way. Yeah, you have to.
Maybe that was a test. Maybe that was a part of the test, seeing if they would lower their firewall or not. It's unbelievable.
Another interesting problem we have with regulators, and we try to address that in Switzerland, but it's a very difficult one. Hear me out. Most of the regulators, they will come with new regulations based on advice they get from Big Four or other type of people. So they come with new regulation. Sometimes the regulation makes sense. Sometimes it makes no sense whatsoever. The problem we have is if a regulator, your regulator, comes to you and comes with a new regulation and you know this is rubbish, you know this makes no sense whatsoever, this does not apply in a real world, you don't dare raising your hand and telling that to the regulator, because you know full well if you raise your hand, the next audit will be for your organization, because they will not forget that you are the one who asked these dangerous questions. And so for that very reason, the world of regulators and regulators is not very dynamic. We usually receive requests from our regulators and we don't dare answering because we don't want to emerge. And so the way we address that is by creating a community, making ourselves anonymous, and appointing someone who is not a CISO of the banks to be the interlocutor with the regulator, representing the entire banking community. So the regulator would not know exactly who originated the question. And so we could safely tell the regulator, this, and that does not make sense. And so we knew that the regulator would not counter that by attacking or auditing the originator. So that was a good trick that we put in place to address this problem. But this is a true problem.
Yeah, that's a great trick. I think, an analogous issue is it's sort of, they're just trying to create a common denominator between all companies, quote unquote, based on these larger companies. But that's an impossible task to do.
For example, again, going back to bank, a bank could be an international bank with operations all over the world, or it could be a private bank with just one or two branches. Both are banks. Both need to be run very differently. Another example, an organization that does, cars in Europe might not have the same culture as an organization that does car in China. So you
That's
should
right.
not use the same standard because the culture is different. Culture is what should motivate the level of cybersecurity, should also motivate your priorities. Because behind every cybersecurity incident, you've got a human being. A
That's
human
right.
being, they behave according to culture. So we have to be culture dependent, and we cannot have a standard that applies to everyone. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, for sure. I'm I'm going to throw a zinger at you again. Just keep it fresh here, Pierre. If animals could talk for one day, what animal would cause the most problems?
Do that again.
If animals could talk for one day, which animal would cause the most problems?
Worms, you know, the worms that are in the ground. You've
Yeah,
got more worms than any other living animal on the planet. So if they start speaking, you will be inundated. So because of the sheer number.
worms is an excellent answer. I didn't even think about that. That's true. There's so many out there. Inevitably, all of them have their own unique opinions. You want to talk about trying to standardize something? You cannot do that with worms.
You would not be able to.
Agreed, Pierre. That's an excellent answer. Hey, you've already alluded to this some, but I'm curious to hear more on this. You mentioned that a lot of these regulators, not all of them, but a lot of them are young consultants with limited real world experience. How does that kind of dig in a little bit more about how that shapes the gaps that you see in DORA and NIS2 today?
They don't ask the right question. They don't know the real life. They emerged from a consulting organization, so they don't have their fingers dirty. They don't know what it's like, or they just graduated and yeah, they know the theory very well. Fantastic. They could tell between a 250 bits encryption versus a 512 bits encryption. Guess what? It's irrelevant. People will not attack on that front. They will attack somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so they don't ask the right question. They just don't ask the right question. Like, do you know exactly how many machines you've got into your entire bank? It looks like a silly question. Of course you know. No, actually no. 95% of the organizations in the world don't have a clue on all the computers, on all the endpoints they have, how they are configured and whatnot. So it's fantastic source for that attack. That's just a silly example, but yes, they work on assumption. They don't have real experience, so they cannot ask the right question.
Yeah. You mentioned that adoption of these regulations has been hit or miss. Europe, in some ways, seems unconvinced that these regulations will have real teeth, or at least they haven't seen that so far. Do you think enforcement will look more like GDPR, or will it be more symbolic at first?
We don't know yet.
Don't know.
The jury is out. The word I get from the street, if you will, is that symbolic.
Yeah.
GDPR is a success because most of us, and I was the chief privacy officer of a big international organization at the time of GDPR. So I was very much into the GDPR problem. GDPR was a fantastic success because there was a fine attached to it. If you did not meet the GDPR regulation, you could be fined a significant amount of money. So we were all waiting to see if someone was in fact really getting fined. And just to check if there was teeth behind this regulation or if it was just word of mouth and that was it. And so, yes, some people got significantly fined. So that was a very clear message. Okay, we've got to take that stuff seriously. And the board started to take that stuff seriously. For NIS2 and DORA, we are still waiting for the first entity, for the first firm to be fined. When it happens, we will talk, and then we will determine whether this is something that we should really worry about. But at the very moment, we're still unsure. I'm sad to say that because I'd love to say that this is working and that's really helping all these people in Europe to get better. But there is a risk that it won't happen. There is still a risk.
You mentioned, so I know NIS2 is guidance, and local laws are formed as a part of the guidance that's coming down from NIS2. Are the penalties for not adhering to those NIS2 guidelines also set in place by the nations themselves? So, like, are the nations the ones that are enforcing those penalties for
Yes.
non-compliance?
Of course, I'm not a true expert on that very fine granularity on the implementation of NIS2, but I believe that to determine what kind of fine can be applied is left to the local legislation. So yes, a country could say, if you are in breach, that will cost you up to 1% of your global profit, and another one could say it will cost you up to 100,000 euros, and that's it. So I do believe that it's really up to the legislation, that is the country, to determine the level of the fine.
Yeah. Let's talk about DORA. If you were advising a bank, big bank, small bank, where should they focus first to be meaningfully ready for DORA? Where do you think they should dedicate their efforts first?
Well, it's somewhat easy to answer that one. You've got some hard numbers that you have to meet in DORA, and either you meet them or you don't meet them. These hard numbers is, how much time do you have to disclose to the regulator that you had an incident? And you've got that as a hard number. If you don't make it because your infrastructure is not able to tell you have an incident, then you're in breach. There's no doubt about that, you're in breach. So the few things that you have to put in place, no matter what, you have to have proper monitoring in place. You have to have some people to continuously collect all these events and not let these events stay on log files that nobody looked at. But these people have got to look at these logs, perform some AI or whatnot, but being able to tell you we have a problem, we need to dig into it. And so that will help you to be able to comply and go back to the regulator within these 24 hours and say, okay, this is the problem, this is what we're going to do. So that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, in reality, when you have an incident, you will be judged, and you being the firm, you will be judged on the way you react. Usually you are not judged on whether the incident took place or not. You will be judged on how did you react to that incident.
Mm-hmm.
And if you react poorly, you will be judged poorly by the market, by the end user, by your customers, and by the regulator. So it's important that you react adequately. And that requires that the board and everyone else, because it's a trickling effect, is being educated on the principles of an incident, what happens during an incident, and how should I behave. So that means that we have to have a proper incident response in place. We have to have people to tell us whenever there is an incident, but we also have to know how to behave when there is an incident. That is, you should exercise tabletop, or you should undertake tabletop exercise at least. If you've never had a tabletop exercise, I'm telling you, the first one will be a major disaster. Everybody will be frantic and scream and say, this is the end of the world because I don't know how to react. Perhaps the second or the third exercise, people will start growing a little bit that special muscle that makes you a little bit more resilient to incidents. So these are the two things, in my view, that are really that have to be put in place as number one priority. Monitoring to collect and alert, to monitor, detect, and respond if you have any problem, and proper incident response that is being tested and that can prove to be efficient in the moment of an incident. If you do that, that's a good start. That's a good start.
Yeah. Operational resilience and incident reporting, knowing what's happening and how to respond in a situation where things may have gone south is what I'm hearing there.
Well, how many times have I seen, I've done a lot of tabletop exercises and I've participated to a lot of incidents where the CEO and or the board, they truly believe that a cybersecurity problem is constrained to the cybersecurity team to have all the answers. In fact, it's not true. Let's say I have a ransomware and the bad guys are asking me the equivalent of $500,000. It's not the CISO to decide. The CISO will have to go to the board or will have to go to the executive committee and say, we have a ransomware. We are being asked to pay $500,000. I can give you my opinion, but should we pay or should we not pay? Are you ready? And then the board has never been exposed to that. By the way, we have to pay in Bitcoins. And by the way, we are Saturday. We don't even know if we have a Bitcoin account. We have no idea on how to operate that stuff. And then the board realized that, oh my God, I was not prepared to that. No, you were not prepared to that. And also, can we pay a ransom in our country? Is it legal? You have to call the legal counsel for that one. And should we contact our customers? When should we contact our customers? Right now? Should we contact the public? Oh, I don't know. I've never been exposed to that. So this is the reality of an incident. They believe that it's purely cyber, whereby the reality of an incident is almost everything but cyber. You will have to deal with finance, with public relationship, with risk management, board decision. It's fascinating. And organizations don't know about that most of the time.
You know, it's really interesting. At a prior company, I worked for a cloud security company. We did a handful of events and just sort of forums whenever the new SEC regulations came out here in the States. And one of the things that we did was we actually did a session with somebody who his company was in charge of putting together sandbox environments that made tabletop exercises a little bit more real for teams. But one of the things that he continuously told us was these shouldn't just be constrained to security departments. Like, these need to be cross-functional tabletop exercises. Like, yes, absolutely, you should have your playbook for what you're going to do as a security team whenever something like this happens. But you also need to make sure that you have a playbook for how you interact with your CEO, how you interact with your board, how you interact with your CFO. Because to your point, it's like this stuff becomes more than a security problem very, very quickly. You know,
Very
even if
quickly.
it started as a security issue, it's much more
Exactly
than
right.
that. So, yeah.
It escalates very, very quickly. And people who are not related to cyber will have to take some very important decisions. They have to be prepared for that. Otherwise, they get caught off guard.
Yeah,
You
right.
have to take a decision.
Yeah, exactly. Um, you know, one of the things it sounds like to me, based on these NIS2 requirements, is some degree of information sharing. You know, it sounds like there's this component to NIS2. You know, you've built communities where 150 plus CISOs are all sharing information openly. Speak to us a little bit about this information sharing component of NIS2. What is that, and why is it important?
Well, let me give you a simple example. You have on day one a bank located somewhere in the world that they get attacked on the trading floor with a very specific, very fine-tuned type of phishing attack on the trading floor. Well, it would be very useful for all the other banks who have a trading floor to learn about that incident just right now, so that they can prepare themselves. They can fine-tune the phishing mechanism, the anti-phishing mechanism. They can ask the monitoring system to have a specific look at that. So the fact that we can share information, not only about best practice, but also about incident happening, so that we can help each other. They have my back, I have their back. That makes us significantly more resilient and more efficient against cybersecurity incident than if you are alone. You might know that I was the CISO, the CSO of Microsoft in Asia. So Microsoft is a huge, fantastic organization, and they've got this security right, definitely. But it's just one organization.
Of course.
Just alone, no matter how big the budget was and so on, just being a single organization is not enough. You've got to partner with other organizations. You've got to share information. The bad guys, they work together. We all know that. Well, we should work together as well. The good guys should have a community, and we help each other against the bad guy. So this is the truth. It doesn't work all the time. The difficulty with sharing, in USA, you put in place what we call the ISAC, the Information Sharing and Analysis Center. I was part of building that long time ago. You have one per industry, works reasonably well. I would not say fantastically well, but it works reasonably well. Some industries are better than others. I tried to build something similar when I was in Asia. And people said, yes, fantastic. But when I built this ISAC, nobody would speak. They would not dare speaking because they were worried that if they were to speak about a weakness they have, some people would use that against them. And so you've got to mature. You've got to go above and beyond that. Yes, we might be competing in the real life, but the CISO of these two organizations have got to share, because your weaknesses is not a business differentiator. We have to help each other to have the same baseline of security and learn from each other. This is critical. But again, it depends really. It's cultural. Some countries will accept that. Some industries will accept that. Others will have great problems. But it's essential to me. Absolutely essential.
So Is it an information sharing a requirement within NIS2? Is there actually verbiage within the guidelines that sort of mandate that information sharing? Is that how it is?
Yes and no. It's a requirement, but it can be easily be addressed with a tick in the box. Oh yes, I subscribe to blah, blah, blah. Therefore, I've got an information sharing. Yes. Is it efficient? No. Do you share things? No. At least, yeah. It's
Yeah.
recognized as. So you have to dig a little bit deeper and see whether this is just a facade or whether this is really a community, a vibrant community where people truly share information with each other. And very seldom is the case. I've got some communities, for example, on a per country basis, the government might promote that the critical infrastructure work together and share information. That's always behind the scene. That's not something you make public. But yes, that happens. Also, the cybersecurity community is a closely knit community. Most CISOs, we know each other. And so we don't have a problem to have our own WhatsApp or equivalent and share information. What we don't want is when the regulator steps in. As soon as the regulator steps in, we shut our mouth, we don't say anything because no. So it has to be regulator free, and then we can share it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You have advocated in the past for replacing the CISO with the Chief Resilience Officer. Why has that shift become even more important under these new regulations like DORA?
If I look at the problems I could be faced with today, I could have a cybersecurity incident. I could also place too much trust on my AI strategy. Perhaps I could give too much information to Gemini or Copilot or ChatGPT or whatnot. Or I could have some other problems, such as one of my employee has disclosed some private information about my customers. That's not a cybersecurity issue, That on its own, these are not cybersecurity issues, but it significantly impact the organization. So cybersecurity is just but one element of the entire resilience problem that organizations are faced with, especially if we speak about digital resilience. I advocate that increasingly it's fantastic to have a CISO, but we need to go one layer above. We need to have someone who has a complete understanding on the resilience impact, when things could go wrong, and how do we maintain resilience into this organization. So that's why I'm advocating for this Chief Resilience Officer or equivalent, and someone who would have a closer connection with the board and the executive committee than the CISO usually has. The reality is that most of the CISOs, and God bless us, and I'm one of them, we come with a technical background, and usually we have great difficulty in communicate effectively to non-technical people. I've been extremely lucky because at some point in time, I decided to stop doing cybersecurity and I started focusing on board advisory and enterprise risk management. It gave me the tools that I could use to communicate with board and executive committees. And that really was a game changer. But most of the CISOs, we still have that difficulty. And so when we go to the board and try to explain why we need an increase of our budget by 10%, we cannot explain why. We're not good at explaining why. And so that's why we need someone in between who is not a techie, not someone who is an expert in cybersecurity or anything, but someone who understands the company, who is trusted by the company, who can communicate about this digital risk, this resilience risk with the board and the executive committee.
That makes a ton of sense to me. Again, even thinking back to the tabletop exercise idea that we had a second ago, that whole idea of a cross-functional tabletop exercise, that Chief Resilience Officer seems like a great person to lead that, because that person could then rally the troops, not just within security, but within finance, and take all of that to the board to be able to speak in a language the board understands. It seems like that person could be the quarterback, to use an American football analogy, the person to kind of coordinate all of those things.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's what I believe. And I hope that gradually the community or the market will react towards that direction, because I think it's much needed. I see pockets, I see in the very sophisticated organizations, I see something like that happening. It has a different name, doesn't matter. You call it whatever you want, but I see that gradually happening. But there's not yet a common understanding that the CISO on its own is not equipped to communicate the reality of the problem, and he's not being given the full scope of the problem. So someone else has got to take that responsibility. We cannot leave it untouched.
And I would say as well, from what I hear, I've never been a CISO, you have, but I would assume that the CISO's plate is already way full with all of the other things that they're having to deal with, specifically within their own departments, that they don't necessarily have the white space. They may have the desire to move into a role like that, but they don't necessarily have the white space to educate themselves more on how to communicate clearly with the board better, or coordinate with these other departments to plan out huge resilience strategies in the situation like a cyber incident,
Okay, you're right. Again, we've got a chicken and egg. As a CISO, I'm not very good at communicating my real need, so I don't have what I need. So I have got to make do with my existing team. Consequently, I'm firefighting day and night. Consequently, I don't have the bandwidth to do more. Consequently, I'm not equipped to speak to the board. Chicken and egg.
Yeah, that's right. Circular. Yeah.
Yes.
Here's my last zinger for you. If you had to teach one class on something that you're not qualified to teach, what is that topic? Maybe something you're passionate about, but you're not qualified to teach it. What would you teach on?
Psychology.
Ooh.
Psychology. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm touching psychology all the time. And that's something that really fascinates me. Like I said earlier in this discussion, behind every cybersecurity issue, you've got a human being. So if you understand human being, you can make the necessary small modification that will have a dramatic impact, positive impact in the way collectively your organization will minimize a cybersecurity incident or will address a cybersecurity incident. I love psychology. I understand nothing about it, but I respect when a psychologist speaks, because they have a different perspective. Yeah, that's what I would like to.
I love that answer. I am I'm a marketer, not a cybersecurity practitioner. However, even me, I feel like every discipline, you can learn something by understanding further how the human brain works. And you can apply it to any area that you're working within.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right.
Let's got a couple more here for you. What's one thing companies prepare for that doesn't actually matter, and one thing that they ignore that absolutely should matter? Anything come to mind?
That's a tough one. The one that they are not really paying too much attention, they are not really paying too much attention, that I can easily say it's AI revolution. Yes, okay. Everybody's talking about AI. Okay, no doubt about that. But the impact from a risk point of view, if you're an easy way to answer is, how many organizations have got an AI policy in place that indicates very clearly the do's and the don'ts? If you don't have an AI policy in place, you're not ready for an AI incident. That's one thing. The second one we already mentioned about that is the readiness of the organization. You might have the best technologies in the world. If your board is not ready to behave the way they should when you have an incident, you're as good as naked. So these are the two things that you really have to pay some attention to. When it comes to things that you have paid too much attention to, one of my favorite ones is data classification. And okay, you will say why? Because most organizations in the world, if you ask them, and that's when I'm at the board, it's also a typical question I ask is, okay, do you have a data classification? Oh yeah, we have a data classification. Tell me more about that. Well, information can be public, confidential, secret, or top secret. Oh, fantastic. Very
Great.
good. And can you bring me an assistant secretary or whatnot? I'd like to talk to her, and I would like to understand how she can determine the difference between a secret and a confidential document. Because most likely, she, and God bless her and God bless all of them, has no clue whatsoever. So consequently, you've got a very good data classification policy that nobody uses, that makes no sense whatsoever. And so you rely on something that does not work. So if you look at data classification of a company, if it's based on this top secret, and what, put it to the blade. It doesn't work. People don't work by it. If you are an army, if you're defense, yes. If you're a standard business organization, no. Nobody does that. Nobody really behaves according to this classification. So this is wasting money. This is wasting effort. Change it.
That's an excellent answer. Jumping back to what you said about AI, there's so many facets to AI. It's going to be fascinating to see how security handles them. Like not only from a data governance perspective in terms of having a policy of what kinds of data are you comfortable sharing with AI systems? Do we have the certain security parameters in place to feel comfortable giving these things data? But even as agentic AI becomes more active in things like our cloud environments, are we comfortable with that? How comfortable are we with AI agents performing certain sorts of tasks inside of our infrastructure? It's companies have to have a line in the sand there. What they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with.
We have no clue whatsoever at this stage. We have no clue. And it's funny because it reminds me of a situation I was with a few years ago where I was the CISO of a huge telecommunication company. And as such, of course, every country would need to know more about the technologies we were providing. And they would ask to test, to look at the source code and test. At Microsoft, we did the same. The countries had access to the source code and they could evaluate the way we did things. But okay, you test a 4G or a 5G network, but in reality, this 5G network is used in combination with some agentic AI, with some cloud, with some this, some that. So just testing in isolation will never give you a proper understanding on what is really happening. And AI and agentic AI is opening another world of something dark. Nobody has a real clue of what's happening. Are the permission properly identified? Do we know exactly what's happening? So it's a mess. It's a huge mess. We have no clue whatsoever. And so that's all we can do. That we're crossing fingers and hoping that that nothing goes wrong. Because from a complexity point of view, unless someone comes with a new technology and whatnot, that also uses AI, by the way, that will be able to tell me exactly where my risks are in a very fluid environment. Unless someone comes with that, I've got no clue.
But even that technology, do you trust it?
It's
difficult.
Skynet.
Skynet. Listen, don't even get me started on the fact that my Google Home machine is gonna take me over. I try to say please and thank you as much as I can, so that they think favorably.
We never know in case of
they think favorably upon me whenever they come back for us. All right, last question for you, Pierre. For leaders, it's sort of a practical takeaway here. For leaders who are early in that regulatory journey, what's your practical advice maybe for the next 3 to 6 months? What's a good for leaders who are early in that journey? What's some good advice for them?
Be very logical. Don't come up with a solution unless you've been able to demonstrate that there was a problem, i.e. start by looking at your risks. Document these risks. What could go wrong? What is the likelihood it will go wrong? Did it go wrong in the past? Do you know a company in the same business where it went wrong? So you document that. Once you have got that documented and communicate it with the board, and where they acknowledge that you are right, or they might come up with new things, or they might say this one is irrelevant, that's fine. But as soon as we have an understanding on what are the risks, then you can start putting in place the technologies, the policies, and so on to address these risks. And every time you speak to a vendor, every time someone is trying to sell you something, you have to look at, is it addressing one of these risks? If it's not, I love you, but I will see you next year because I don't have a need for you. So you have to be very religious about everything I will do is based on my understanding of my risks. If it's not in my risk, I am not interested.
Very good. That sounds a lot to me like, prioritizing an alert queue in a way. You assess what's happening, you pull in as much context as you can, you see where your greatest needs are, and then you attack those. And it's sort of a maniacal focus, if you will, keeping focus and not chasing rabbits. So that's a good, it's good practical advice there.
That's what, and I don't want to make it a sales pitch, but that's why Expel makes so much sense. People will on my behalf look at everything that's happening, and be able to determine what are the things that you should really worry about, and the things that Don't worry about that one. Don't waste any of your quality time on that one. That is very useful stuff. I mean, yeah.
We've only got so much time, only so much time in the day. So, Pierre, this was great. I appreciate you taking time and answering some questions here, including some curveballs for you. No, I hope this conversation helps shed some light on these two regulations and helps people better understand them, but also act on them. So, really helpful. Appreciate you.
Thank you.